My name is Sydney and I turned 31 this morning. For most of my life, my birthday has been a calendar footnote in a house where other people's milestones got fireworks. This year I didn't send reminders, didn't hint, didn't nudge. I did something else instead. I took a $75,000 performance bonus nobody in my family even knew existed and bought myself a little house on a lake. I posted a few casual photos. Sunlight on water, a blue-gray porch, a dock with room for 2 chairs, and watched my notifications erupt like a sparkler lit in a dark room. Before I tell you how a quiet purchase turned into the loudest message I've ever sent, drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to build your own celebration when the people closest to you forgot you were worth one. I grew up in Westlake Hills, the kind of suburb where hedges are shaped like decisions and driveways tell you what people want you to think about them. Our 5-bedroom colonial looked like a catalog picture. Brick shutters, a front door my mother repainted every spring so the color would photograph well. From the sidewalk, we were the sort of family you'd assume hosted perfect dinners and wrote each other notes for no reason. Inside, the gravitational pull ran one direction. My brother Kyle was the sun and the rest of us orbited with appropriate awe. My father, Harold, climbed corporate law the way some people climb mountains. One handhold after another until the view belongs to you. By the time I hit middle school, he was chief legal counsel for a Fortune 500 company and never missed a chance to talk about Kyle following in his footsteps. When my brother made the debate team, Dad booked the best restaurant in town, ordered a dessert with a sparkler and quoted the coach's email like scripture. When I was inducted into National Honor Society with a perfect GP, he patted my shoulder and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," without looking up from the business section. My mother, Elaine, turned the house into a museum of Kyle. The living room wall was a timeline of his life. Formal portraits, trophies on floating shelves, framed certificates with heavy matting. My awards lived in a cardboard box in the attic I found by accident while searching for ornaments. The difference wasn't subtle. It was design. On my 10th birthday, I bounced down the stairs expecting at least pancakes with candles. I found my parents at the table with Kyle, surrounded by campus brochures. He was graduating that year, and apparently his college tour couldn't wait a single day. The sun set on a cake that never came. Around dinner, my mother gasped, hand to throat, "Oh goodness, Sydney, today's your birthday." She looked more embarrassed than sorry. "We've been so busy with Kyle's applications." Dad said, "We'll get you something next weekend," in the tone people use for dry cleaning. Next weekend came and went. It's amazing how quickly a promise can evaporate when it wasn't tethered to care in the first place. Kyle wasn't cruel. That would have required noticing me closely enough to aim. He lived in a bubble of approval that kept him comfortably oblivious. When he did think of me, he'd toss a compliment like a coin into a fountain or let me tag along with his friends as if he were donating center seats. Family gatherings played the same song. Relatives clustering around Kyle asking about internships, girlfriends, offers, while I answered a polite question or two about classes and then faded. Holidays became festivals for whatever Kyle had accomplished recently. Another toast, another anecdote, another video montage my mother had thrown together. When I was 16, I tried to talk about the pattern. I practiced for weeks so I wouldn't sound jealous. I waited until Kyle was out and approached my parents in the living room. "I feel like my accomplishments don't land the way his do," I said, heart pounding. Dad lowered his glasses and looked like I had interrupted a deposition. "That's ridiculous. We're proud of both our children. But you forget things," I said. "My events. My birthdays. Kyle gets parties and speeches." Mom sighed, fingers scrolling her phone. "Sweetie, your brother is at a critical point. His achievements now determine his future. You're still young. Your time will come." Dad added, "Kyle puts himself out there more. You're quiet. We can't celebrate what we don't see." The conversation ended with the kind of love that sounds reasonable and changes nothing. College became a door I could walk through and close gently behind me. I chose Northwestern for its program and its distance. I told myself space would make them miss me and see me as more than an extra in the Kyle show. Space made it easier to forget. The forgotten birthdays became tradition. 3 stand out like pins on a map. Sweet 16. The one that mattered to everyone else's parents. I circled the date on every calendar in the house, left party magazines open on the kitchen island, dropped hints so obvious I cringed at myself later. 2 days before, Mom announced they needed to drop me with Grandma because she and Dad were flying Kyle to a Stanford recruitment event. I reminded her Saturday was my birthday. A brief wash of guilt crossed her face. We'll celebrate after, she said, already halfway to her packing list. Dad said, Stanford could determine his entire future, Sydney. I ate stale coffee cake with Grandma while my feed filled with my classmates in tiaras. My parents posted photos of Kyle under palm trees, beaming. 21 should have been easy to acknowledge and possible to share. It landed the same weekend as Kyle's engagement party. My parents booked a ballroom and a quartet and never connected the dates. I attended in a dress I paid for with extra shifts, smiled for photos, and toasted my brother and his fiancée while my birthday passed unnoticed except for a single text from Mom. Happy birthday. Busy day, call you tomorrow. 25 arrived with a silent phone and a whirlwind of congratulations for Kyle's industry award. They organized a surprise dinner for him the same evening and sent me a group message the next day. Hope you had a nice one. Yesterday was crazy. For Kyle's 30th they rented a yacht and a band. For his 32nd they rented Hawaii. For his 35th they flew in a chef who'd been on television. My mother did a countdown on Instagram like time itself served him. When I turned 30 I got a belated card, late even for regret. My best friend Jordan watched it all with me the way you watch a friend stay in a room you know is hurting her. After my 30th she said, "This is emotional neglect, Sid. At minimum it's a pattern. You have to say something." I have, I said. They'll tell me I'm sensitive. They'll promise to do better. Then Kyle will do anything at all and the calendar resets around him. So what's the plan? She asked. Keep narrating your needs to people who've proven they don't listen? I didn't have an answer. I tried one more version last year. Light mentions in phone calls that I was turning 31 soon and planning to take the day off. The mentions dropped into a well and never made a sound. What they never saw, couldn't see because they didn't look, was the life I was building in the quiet. I graduated with honors in marketing and communications, took a junior role at a Chicago agency, learned fast, volunteered for the assignments that came with steep learning curves and low glory. When my boss left for Apex Creative, he took me with him. The job came with longer hours and a view of the kind of rooms where decisions get made. Dad's reaction was predictable. Advertising, huh? I suppose someone has to do it. I always thought you'd go to law school. It stung. I let the sting do what it does and kept working. At Apex, I found people who valued what I could build. A year in, the executive creative director, Teresa Williams, slid me into a pitch team for a major skincare brand that wanted to reinvent itself for Gen Z and younger millennials. Your Whitney deck nailed the demographic insight, she said. I need that voice in the room. We won. I became deputy on an account bigger than anything I'd touched. For 2 years I arrived before sunrise, left after dark, and turned the campaign into a map we could follow. Personas that felt like actual people, focus groups that weren't just a checkbox, copy that didn't sound like a boardroom talking to a teenager. When people grumbled about my standards, Teresa backed me. Sydney has a map, she told them. Follow it. The launch hit harder than forecast. Sales rose 37% in the first quarter. The client increased spend. Trades wrote about us without being asked. 4 months later, the CEO called an all-hands. Profit sharing, he announced for the first time since the policy existed. Then he handed the mic to Teresa, who called my name. The real architect, she said, and the room applauded me like they didn't know my last name or my brother's title. The CEO shook my hand and announced an additional performance award. In recognition of extraordinary contribution, $75,000. For a second I thought I heard wrong. $75,000 is a number that can change how a year feels. Colleagues made jokes about what I'd buy. I smiled and filed the moment where I keep things I want to hold. On instinct, my hand went to my phone to call home. I pictured my mother's voice bright with surprise, my father grudgingly impressed. Then my memory did that quiet thing where it holds up the last conversation for comparison. Me trying to tell Dad about an award, him taking a call from Kyle mid-sentence, his later question about when I was going to do something substantial. I set the phone down. This one could be mine alone. That night I opened a high-yield account and set up deposit details. I texted Jordan. She screamed via emoji and then arrived at my door with champagne. This is huge, she said. What's the plan? I didn't know yet. I just knew whatever I did next would be for me, not for show. As my birthday approached, the family group chat glowed with logistics for Kyle's promotion party. junior partner at his firm. A phrase my father used like prayer beads. My mother asked for $500 toward a luxury watch from all of us, asked me to take Friday off 3 weeks from now, listed menu options for the caterer with the urgency of a crisis line. The date on the kitchen calendar in their house, the one I'd circled myself as a kid, came and went in their messages with the same invisibility it always had. I decided not to remind them. This time I wanted to see what happened if I said nothing at all. On the morning I turned 31, sunlight came in through my bedroom the way it always does, indifferent and kind. I had taken the day off, told no one in my family, made a small ritual of it. I walked to the French cafe I like and ordered breakfast like I was in a city that had always been on my side. While I ate, I scrolled real estate listings the way you scroll daydreams. Chicago ownership had always felt several promotions away. But the bonus had changed the math, and a new idea had been padding around the corners of my mind for weeks without introducing itself. A listing stopped me. A lakefront cottage 2 hours away in a small Michigan town. 3 bedrooms, modest updates needed. A deck that looked like it understood mornings. A dock that looked like it understood silence. The asking price wasn't a fantasy. I called the agent on a whim. She answered on the second ring, said she was in Chicago that day, could meet me after lunch. 3 hours later, Patricia spread comps and floor plans between our coffee cups. This region has been steadily appreciating, she said, pointing to a line on a chart. And if you ever choose to rent short-term in summer and fall, the market is strong. I'm thinking personal retreat, I said. She nodded. A lot of my clients start there. Some never rent. What matters is affordability and fit. Fit. The word lodged in my chest. By late afternoon I was on a video tour. The agent on site walking room to room, measuring windows, opening closets, taking the camera to every corner I asked. The house wasn't fancy. Didn't need to be. It looked like peace. When the tour ended, I sat in the quiet and listened to whatever part of me had been talking in a whisper for years. The sensible move would be to wait, to research more, to see more properties. Sensible had never gotten me a birthday cake. I emailed Patricia. I'd like to make an offer. She sent the forms. I filled them out. I initiated the earnest money transfer. At 6:17 p.m. on my birthday, I signed an electronic offer for a house on a lake. I walked to the park and watched ducks draw lines across a pond and felt something inside me settle that had been wobbling since childhood. My phone rang as I headed home. "Sydney, darling," my mother said. "We're finalizing Kyle's menu and need your vote. Salmon or tenderloin?" She talked through chair covers and favor boxes and flight arrivals. She never said the date out loud. "Also," she added, "we'll need you to pick up Aunt Julia for Kyle's party. Your father is busy with partners and Kyle is meeting the photographer. You're such a reliable daughter." "Sure, Mom," I said. I hung up and refreshed my email. Offer submitted. I breathed like a person who had done something irreversible and right. The next day Patricia called. They accepted, no counter. They've already relocated and want a quick close. When can you meet a mortgage broker? She recommended Michael, a specialist in second homes. I printed pay stubs, brought the bonus letter, watched him do math that landed on the same answer mine had. This was doable. Underwriting moved faster than I was prepared for. The inspection found only minor repairs the sellers agreed to do. 3 weeks later, one day before the family dinner my parents had planned before Kyle's celebration, I signed closing documents, pocketed keys that felt heavier than metal, and drove not to my parents' house but in the opposite direction, toward Michigan and a front porch that had been waiting for a name. I texted my mother a lie I didn't feel obliged to decorate. "Work emergency. Can't make the family dinner. I'll do my best tomorrow." She accepted the excuse because it fit the narrative where my job is a hobby to be scheduled around theirs. I had no intention of showing up. For once, my own milestone got to come first. The drive north stalked my breath into an even rhythm I didn't realize I'd been missing. The property looked better than the listing. The driveway dappled with sunlight, the wraparound porch awful in the best way, the water throwing light around like confetti at its own party. Inside was empty and echoing imperfect. I unrolled an air mattress, stocked the fridge with simple things, and stood on the deck until the sky turned gold and then blue and then black. I slept surrounded by a quiet that felt like permission. In the morning, the neighbors introduced themselves the way people do when they've decided on their own to form a community. Margaret and James from the house to the north appeared with a covered dish and insisted I come by that night. We overcook by design when someone new arrives, Margaret said. We ate on their screened porch and they told me the lake's rhythms. Boats and swimming in summer, color and wineries in fall, cross-country tracks in winter, wildflowers in spring. Each season has its own magic, James said, and I believed him. Saturday I drove into town, the one with 3 stoplights and a diner that likely knows your order by your 3rd visit. I chose a bed, a sofa and chairs, a table with enough room for future people and basic kitchenware. Are we delivering to Silver Lake? The owner asked. You must be the new owner of the old Peterson place. Word travels fast. It did. Over the next month I drove up every weekend, painting cabinets a soft blue-gray, swapping light fixtures, choosing rugs that felt like summer, turning one guest room into a nautical wink and the other into a botanic exhale. The primary bedroom became white and pale blue, the color of morning if morning had a brand. I framed a few certificates, not to brag but to remind myself what happens when I keep going, and mixed them with landscape photos I'd collected. The shelves held books that shaped me and souvenirs I didn't need to justify to anyone. The deck got Adirondack chairs the color of popsicles and a table with a lantern that would look good in photos and better in real life. 6 weeks in, the house felt like a person. I took a full week off to finish and, on the last morning, walked to the dock with coffee and watched ducks navigate reeds like traffic patterns they understood. On impulse, I took photos. The light in the kitchen, the way the deck looked from the yard, the view from the upstairs window, a close-up of the grain in the new dining table. Back inside, I scrolled through them and felt the uncommon satisfaction that comes from seeing outside what you built inside. I opened Instagram, where I mostly lurk, chose a handful of images and wrote, "Weekend vibes. Nothing beats lake life." I hesitated. Was I seeking validation from the same place I had decided not to seek it? It didn't feel like that. It felt like documenting a moment I wanted to keep. I hit share, put my phone face down and went about the day. By the time I packed my overnight bag and cleaned the kitchen, my phone was lit with hearts and question marks. Friends wanted details. The photos were doing their job. The house looked like something you could want without apology. Then I saw 3 names stacked near the top of the notifications. My mother, my father, and Kyle. The comments were brief and escalating. "Whose house is this?" from Mom. "Call me immediately," from Dad. "Must be nice to waste money on rentals while we plan my partnership celebration," from Kyle. Extended family began to arrive in my DMs like curious birds. "Aunt Julia, lovely. Didn't know you bought a lake place." "Cousin Megan, oh, did you buy a house?" The family chat is exploding. By Monday morning, my mother had texted 3 times and called twice. Dad left 2 voicemails that sounded like letters from an HO. Kyle's message flashed on my screen at lunch. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. What's going on?" On the post itself, the parents had decided to have a public conversation with me as if Instagram were a kitchen table. "Where did you get money for property?" Dad commented. "This is concerning behavior." Mom wrote, "Why wouldn't you tell us you were going away?" Kyle added, "Some of us are focused on career advancement rather than playing house." Every word was a mirror and none of them liked what they saw. At 5 o'clock a group text arrived from my mother. "Family dinner Thursday at 7. No excuses. We need to discuss several things." The 3 days leading up to it were quieter than I expected. No more calls. No surprise appearances at my office. Silence from people who prefer the stage is simply intermission. Thursday delivered a thunderstorm that felt like a soundtrack. I considered canceling. I didn't. I arrived at 7 sharp and parked behind Kyle's BMW. I rang the bell instead of using my key. A small behavior with a loud meaning. Mom opened the door wearing the neutral face she saves for uncomfortable guests. "Everyone's in the living room," she said. Dad stood by the fireplace with a drink like a prop. Kyle sat with his phone in his hand and his attention everywhere but on it. We did small talk so thin you could see the table through it. No one mentioned the lake house. The air did it for them. In the dining room, my mother's roast beef steamed on china and my father finally put lawyer voice to work. "So," he said, "would you care to explain the photos you posted? Whose property is that?" I took a sip of wine and met his eyes. "Wine," I said. "I bought it last month." Mom laughed a little, the sound people make when they think they've misheard but don't want to look foolish. "That's not possible, darling. Houses cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, I said. This one cost $340,000. I put 75 down and financed the rest. Kyle's fork hit his plate. Where would you get $75,000? From the performance bonus I received for leading the most successful campaign in our company's history, I said. Dad frowned. You never mentioned a bonus. Or any most successful campaign. No, I said. Just like none of you mentioned my birthday 3 weeks ago. The sentence lay on the table between the salt and the roast as if it belonged there. Mom flinched. Sydney, we've been incredibly busy with Kyle's partnership events. These are once in a lifetime. They always are, I said not loud. Every year there's a reason my birthday isn't worth remembering. And there's always a reason his life takes precedence. Kyle shifted. That's not fair. Nobody deliberately forgot. When was the last time anyone remembered without me reminding you? I asked. When was the last time anyone planned even a simple dinner for me? Dad's mouth tightened. This isn't about birthdays. This is about making major financial decisions without consulting your family. Purchasing real estate is serious and requires knowledge. I have knowledge, I said. I did the homework. I have excellent credit. The numbers work. The property is already appreciating. I don't need permission. Mom tried again. But why wouldn't you tell us? She asked, genuinely bewildered. We're your family. Because you've shown me for years that what matters to me doesn't register with you unless it inconveniences your plans, I said. Why would I hand you something precious just to watch you set it down? Dad scoffed. We've always supported both our children equally. I laughed once, a sound I didn't know I could make at this table. That's simply not true, I said and calmly laid out the timeline. The forgotten 10, the lonely 16, the 21 lost under an engagement toast, the 25 swallowed by an award night, the 30 that got a belated card. So when my work recognized me in a way that was visible and concrete, I said, I used it to create something that brings me joy. I did not need a committee. Kyle, quieter than usual, finally looked at me instead of through me. I didn't know, he said. I knew Mom and Dad made a bigger deal of my stuff, but I didn't realize all of that. Mom's eyes were wet. We never meant to make you feel less important. We love you just as much. I believe you believe that, I said. Your actions painted a different picture. Dad tried to pivot to logistics again. Do you even know what winterization costs? Have you considered taxes? Yes, I said. And I've already contracted local services. The neighbors have been kinder to me in 6 weeks than my family has managed in years. There's no need to be harsh, Mom said. We're concerned. You're concerned I did something significant without your input, I said. You're concerned I stopped asking for permission from people who deny it as a reflex. Mostly, you're concerned that the story you tell about us doesn't work if I stop playing the silent role. I set my napkin down. My appetite had left the room before the entree. I'm not here to win your approval, I said. I'm here to state facts. I'm an adult who built a good life without your help. I won't be attending the rest of Kyle's celebrations. I have somewhere to be in the morning where the day doesn't revolve around whether I remembered to make myself small. Dad stood, color rising. You're being dramatic and ungrateful. Everything we've done has been for both our children. I'm being honest, I said. If honesty reads as drama to you, that's the tell. I picked up my bag. Kyle stood too, panic replacing posture. Sid, wait, he said. Don't leave like this. I'm not leaving like this, I said, softening because he'd used my nickname like we were kids again. I'm leaving as someone who finally recognizes her own worth. That's different. Mom followed me to the door, tears tracking her foundation. We can fix this, she said. We can do better. Maybe you can, I said. I'm finished waiting to see if you will. I stepped into rain that had turned gentle, like the sky had remembered how to be kind. I drove through the dark toward a lake that had learned my name, and somewhere on the highway between a house that never celebrated me and a house built to, I felt the weight I'd been carrying set itself down in the back seat and refused to climb forward again. The highway unwound in dark ribbons, wipers metronoming the last of the storm off the windshield. I drove with the window cracked and the cool, rain-washed air moving through the car like a reset button. By the time I turned onto the gravel lane that led to the house, the clouds had thinned and the water lay quiet as if the whole lake had decided to listen. I killed the engine and sat for a minute in the hush that follows hard conversations. The porch light I'd set on a timer glowed like a welcome I didn't have to earn. Inside, I didn't turn on many lamps. I liked how the room held its own outline in the dim fireplace, sofa, the table I'd chosen because its wood looked honest. I spread a blanket on the couch instead of dealing with the air mattress and fell asleep to the small sounds a house makes when it's learning you. Morning came with a clean sky, the kind that shows you every leaf. I padded to the kitchen, made coffee that tasted like a beginning, and carried it to the deck. Sun shifted through the trees in moving squares. A heron stood like a thought on the far side of the cove. I checked my phone out of habit and found what I'd expected. Silence. No apology texts, no second invitations, no voicemails that opened with my name and not a request. The quiet felt less like neglect and more like space. I spent the day doing useful grounding things. I oiled the cutting board, refolded the linen closet, labeled the breaker box. I wrote a short list on a sticky note. Replace porch light bulb. Touch up paint by back door. Order hooks for mudroom. Not glamorous, but each check mark informed my bones I belonged here. I ate lunch on the steps and let the sun find my face. By dusk I'd pulled the last of my overnight bag into drawers and shelves, the symbolic version of taking the long way home and still ending up where you meant to be. On Saturday, Margaret waved from her garden and shouted a question about tomatoes. By afternoon, James ambled over with a catalog of docks because he'd noticed the far cleat wobble. We sat on my deck and talked about wind direction and the best week for fall color like we were solving world peace. When they left, Margaret pressed a folded page into my hand, notes from last winter's storm prep, with a wink that said, "You're in." It's funny how a neighbor's checklist can feel more like family than years of biologically obligated holiday dinners. Work life found me again on Monday, but in a different key. I drove back to Chicago, parked on level 3 because level 2 was full, and walked into an office where people said my name with a tone I recognized. Respect, not spectacle. Teresa stopped by my desk before the morning shuffle. "2 things, she said, perching on my guest chair. 1, the client wants to expand the youth line into skincare adjacent. We'll need a concept deck next week. 2, your talk track from last month? I sent it to Martin. He wants you to present at the all hands next quarter." I nodded and tried not to look like someone who had just been handed a new set of keys. It felt good to be needed for the thing I actually do, not for the role I've been cast in. At lunch, I checked my Instagram post because curiosity is still human. The likes had slowed, but the family comments sat there like pebbles in a shoe. I thought about deleting them and decided to leave them up. I wasn't going to tidy the scene to make anyone comfortable. I answered friends' questions instead. "Yes, I bought it." "No, I didn't win the lottery." "Yes, you can visit." "Bring wine." I'd barely put my phone down when a text from an unknown number slid in. "Can we talk?" "Just us." K. Took me a second to connect letter to person. I stared at the message, heat and chill braided together. I typed back, "Saturday 10 a.m. the Birchwood Cafe." Halfway. I sent it before I let old habit answer for me. The rest of the week passed with work and small, personal rites. I made soup and froze half of it because that's what future me likes. I booked a chimney sweep. I bought a wind chime online after reading a thread of reviews so earnest it made me laugh. Apparently sound matters when the wind makes it for you. I did not call my parents. The space between us wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary with a door. Saturday arrived soft. I got to the cafe early and chose a corner table where the plants blocked eyesight from the front. Kyle walked in looking like the version of himself our mother preferred, pressed, polished, but with dark crescents under his eyes that the best concealer couldn't lift. He hesitated, spotted me, and took the chair opposite like he thought the furniture had been assigned. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, fingers worrying the cardboard coffee sleeve. "I've been thinking about everything." I waited. Silence is a tool when you don't fill it with apologies you don't owe. He blew out a breath. "You were right," he said simply. "About the birthdays, the photos, the attention. I went back through Mom's camera roll after you left. It's like you're always there but at the edge." He winced as if the words scraped his mouth. "Why didn't I see it?" "You benefited from it," I said, not cruelly. "Just true. Seeing under a scaffolding is easier for the person it's built for." He nodded, shame coloring his face in a way I'd never seen. "It's not an excuse, but I kept thinking if I kept everyone proud it would stay easy. I didn't want to notice if that ease cost you something." "It did," I said. It cost me a version of family where showing up for me wasn't optional. He swallowed. I'm sorry. 2 words I'd wanted for so long I almost didn't recognize them when they came. I can't fix the years behind us. But I can stop being part of the problem now. Starting looks like saying something when it's uncomfortable, I said. He nodded again. I told Mom and Dad I'm not letting them put my events on top of yours anymore. There's room for more than one spotlight in a house if you don't insist on directing. We talked for a long time. Not a confessional, an inventory. He told me pressure had been its own prison. I told him invisibility can be a cage you learn to decorate. At some point he asked, do you think I could see the lake place sometime? Not now. When you want. I surprised myself by saying yes. Bring yourself, I said. Leave the performance at home. When we stood, he hugged me like he meant it, not like a family reunion. I should have said this earlier, he added, eyes steady. Happy birthday, Sydney. I nodded, accepting both the sentence and its lateness. Some gifts arrive out of season, they're still gifts. On the drive home, I let the conversation unspool again and found myself feeling something I hadn't planned on. Relief. Not absolution, not forgetting, just a release valve on a system that had been overpressurized for years. I pulled into my apartment garage and caught myself humming. When had I learned to breathe without bracing? Midweek, my wind chime arrived. I drove north after work, installed it on the back corner of the deck, and listened as the lake taught it a song. That night under the stars tasted like a decision I didn't have to announce to anyone. In the morning, I brewed coffee and opened the camera on my phone. The light was ridiculous. The water threw it everywhere. I filmed a few seconds and then looked straight into the lens. If you've ever had to step out of someone else's spotlight to find the rhythm of your own life, I said, hit like so this finds the others walking that road. Subscribe if you want more of the messy, real parts, because this isn't a revenge story. It's a rebuild. And in the comments, tell me the first boundary you set that changed you. 1 sentence. No names. I'm reading. I put the phone down not to check views but to finish my coffee while it was still warm. The lake didn't care about algorithms. I didn't either, not really. The invite was for the people like me a year ago who needed proof you could love your family and still design a life that didn't require disappearing. Back in Chicago, work demanded the next draft of myself. I built the concept deck for the adjacency launch like a house. Foundation, insight, framing, message architecture, fixtures, creative, fireproofing, risk mitigation. Teresa wrote nails on my printout and slid it back to me with a grin. A junior strategist asked if she could shadow my next client call. Yes, I said, remembering when I'd begged for the same. On the call, the client worried the new line would alienate their older base. I walked them through the segmentation and made room for their fear, then cleared the space so they could see past it. When we hung up, the strategist mouthed, "Teach me that." Late Thursday, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother I recognized as a rough draft edited 20 times. "Sydney, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm sorry for the ways we made you feel secondary. Your father and I would like to see you, somewhere neutral, when you're ready. No clock. No demand. Just a bridge." I stared at it for a while and felt both wary and curious. The older version of me would have replied immediately to keep the peace. The current version of me replied the next day with a time and the name of a restaurant we didn't frequent, with tables far enough apart to breathe between sentences. We met on a Tuesday. My mother wore the necklace she saves for events where she plans to behave. My father wore the expression he saves for court. We ordered, made small talk about nothing, and then sat with the topic between us like a third guest. "I went through old calendars," my mother said, pulling a folded paper from her bag. "Lists of your birthdays. I remembered more of them than I thought." She handed it to me like a peace offering and a defense all at once. I didn't reach for the sheet. "It's not a ledger," I said quietly. "It's a pattern. It's how it felt to grow up in a house that posted Kyle's countdowns and sent me oops texts." Her eyes filled. "I'm sorry," she said again, and it landed differently this time. Less performative, more naked. "We told ourselves you were the sturdy one. That you didn't need fuss." "I didn't need a yacht," I said. "I needed a cake that someone bought on purpose." My father cleared his throat like a warning to himself. "Your purchase," he said, pivoting to the topic he knows how to hold. "Have you considered property tax implications? Insurance levels? In that region, winterization." I've scheduled all of it, I said. If you have spreadsheets, I'll read them. If you have opinions, say them like suggestions, not dictates. He glanced at my mother and then back at me. Suggestions, then. Prepay quarterly taxes if possible. And check the frost depth before you contract any landscaping. It wasn't affection, but it was an offering in his language. I took it as such. We left with a tentative plan to try again in a month. Not forgiveness. Not even trust. But a version of forward I could recognize without borrowing hope I couldn't afford. In the weeks after that dinner, the house and I grew braver together. I learned the timing on the hot water heater and the trick to the back door's stubborn latch. I found a local upholsterer who could rescue a chair I loved from a fabric it didn't deserve. I started keeping a pair of sneakers and a cheap rain jacket by the door because walks turn into walks and you're happier when you say yes. On a Saturday, I drove the long way around the lake and discovered a produce stand run by a woman who sells eggs by the half dozen and stories by the spiral. You'll need good knives for cutting tomatoes like this, she said. Keep them sharp. Everything else is easier. Jordan visited at last, barreling through the front door with a bag of expensive snacks and enough joy to rewire the place. Show me everything, she declared, and I did. Each painted hinge, the reading lamp that actually casts light where you need it, the view from the upstairs nook that makes you understand the phrase stole my breath. We sat on the dock that evening with our feet over the edge and the wind chime telling time. She listened to the story of the dinner and the cafe with Kyle and the text from my mother and didn't try to rush any of it to a neater ending. You finally stopped auditioning for your own family, she said. That's the show. On Sunday we walked a trail the locals call the Ribbon because it winds through birch and fern in lazy curves. A couple passed us with a golden retriever who decided we were his now. Jordan laughed and said, I could get used to this place. Me too, I said, realizing I already had. At the office, the adjacency pitch moved from concept to commit. We booked talent for production, scheduled shoots that would make us chase golden hour like a religion, and negotiated music rights with a company that thinks every millisecond has a price. Teresa called me into her glass-walled room one afternoon and closed the door, which she rarely does. This isn't official yet, she said, but I nominated you for the emerging leaders list. Martin's backing it. You won't hear for a while. Either way, the nom alone opens rooms. I swallowed the knot in my throat and managed, thank you. She shrugged, a smile tucked into the corner of her mouth. You bulldozed your way here with competence. I'm just holding the door. The more I built, the less I needed to broadcast. The lake house didn't turn into a content farm. It turned into oxygen. I posted now and then. Sun on the floor, a pie that looked like summer, the dog from the trail asleep on our dock because apparently we were on his route now. Friends messaged about weekends. I started a shared calendar so I wouldn't double book the guest room. I drew up house rules that sounded like kindness. Leave what you use as good as you found it, return the book you borrow, fill the ice cube trays like a person who will be thirsty later. 2 months after the confrontation, Kyle texted again. Can I come up next weekend? Just me. I said yes and told him to pack shoes he could ruin. He arrived Saturday morning with pastries from a place that spells bakery, like it's French even when it's not. He stood on the porch and turned a slow circle, taking in the trees, the light, the coiled hose I'd finally learned to store without swearing. It's beautiful, he said, voice gone honest. It looks like you. He offered to help with anything and meant it. I handed him the dock catalog and a socket wrench. He and James spent an hour on the wobbly cleat talking about torque like it mattered. It did to that bolt. In the afternoon we took the kayaks out and drifted into the middle of the cove. I didn't get it, he said, paddle resting across his lap. Why you didn't tell us about the bonus? About any of it. He stared at the water surface, then up at me. I understand now. You weren't hiding. You were protecting. Both, I admitted. I didn't want my achievement to become a debate. And I wanted something big that didn't require anyone else's okay. We didn't solve childhood. We didn't rewrite holidays. We paddled back and grilled chicken and ate with our legs tucked under us like we were kids who had finally found a table that fit. Before he left on Sunday, he placed a small box on the counter. Inside was a brass key ring in the shape of the lake's outline. For your keys, he said. You don't have to use it if it's too cheesy. It's perfect, I said, because it was. My parents texted occasionally. Not questions, not demands. Photos of a garden my mother had finally let go a little wild. A link to an article about lake effect snow from my father with a note. Plow early. Ice undercuts traction. It was the smallest version of something like inclusion. I reciprocated in the most generous way I could manage. I sent a picture of the wind chime and wrote, "It sounds like forgiveness on days when I'm generous and like metal on days when I'm not." Mom sent a heart. Dad sent a thumbs up, which from him might as well be poetry. Summer turned greedy with light. The mentorship program at work asked if I'd lead a session on brand storytelling for junior hires. I said yes and built a workshop that did not bore them to death. The lake community held a potluck where Margaret introduced me as the one with the good pie, and I pretended to be humbled while texting Jordan that my personality had finally been correctly categorized. On a Tuesday, Teresa slid me a short list of potential hires and asked for my read. "Who do you want to sit next to at 9 p.m. the night before launch?" she asked. "That's your metric." I circled 2 names and wrote, "These people will keep the wheels on." In August, I got an email at 7:12 a.m. that started with, "Congratulations. The industry list had chosen me." My head made a high-pitched noise my mouth didn't. I forwarded it to Teresa with 12 exclamation points, to Jordan with 17 screaming faces, and to myself because sometimes you have to send good things where you can't lose them. I did not send it to my parents. Not right away. I wanted to feel the shape of the joy before I handed it to people who might sand the edges. A day later, I texted the link with no commentary. My mother called and cried. My father sent a rare complete sentence, "Proud of you." I took the sentence on its own terms and put it somewhere it could live without conditions. September brought colder mornings and the kind of fog that makes the lake feel like a secret. It also brought a card in the mail. Not an email. Not a text. A real card with my name and my mother's hand on the front and a printed interior that said nothing you'd put on a shelf. But below their words, "Dinner next month? We're making a reservation and a list, things we missed, things we can do better." Kyle added in blue ink, "Doc cleat holding fast. Like you." I laughed out loud in my kitchen and then leaned on the counter because sometimes kindness makes your knees a little unreliable. We met at a place I loved and split appetizers like civilians. My mother produced a small envelope with a gift card to a furniture shop I'd mentioned long ago. "For the chair that needs new clothes," she said. My father unfolded his own contribution, a printed checklist for winterizing wells, while saying, "You've likely already done half of this." I had. I circled 3 items I hadn't and thanked him. The conversation wandered into less armored territory. I told them about the junior designer who had surprised me in a meeting with an idea nearly fully formed. My mother asked what made a campaign good in my world and listened to the entire answer. My father told a story about blowing a closing argument early in his career and how a mentor had made him eat the loss and then write a better one. I'd never heard him tell anything that sounded like failure. It made him more human and, for the first time, more reachable. We didn't pretend the past was fixed. We didn't script a hug that would make a good montage. But when the check came, my father didn't reach for it with the reflex that says control. He looked at me instead. "Let me," he said, a request, not an order. "Tonight," I replied. "Next time me." He nodded. It wasn't about the money. It was about math different from arithmetic. As fall colored the trees, the lake house shifted into its heard the rumors about winter mode. I stacked firewood with James and learned the weight of it in my arms. I bought a snow shovel I hoped I wouldn't need and knew I would. I added heavier quilts to the beds, and the house kept silent counsel like houses do when they know more seasons than you. I found myself waking earlier, writing lists in the half-light, and then ignoring them for coffee on the deck because the fog was doing a thing I didn't want to miss. The night before the first frost, I stood in the yard in a sweater too thin and watched my breath ghost, thinking about the year that had tried to break something and had instead revealed what wouldn't bend. My phone buzzed, a message from Jordan, "Proud of you, pie girl." Another from Kyle, a photo from a store with 2 watches, the cheap and the expensive, and a caption, "Guess which one I'm buying myself because I don't need a committee." I replied with the wind chimes sound in letters, ting ting ting, which isn't a word but is somehow an answer. I've heard people say the best revenge is living well. I don't like the word revenge. It still hands the other person the microphone. The best answer maybe is living deliberately. Choosing the place where your feet land and the people who get your Saturday morning. Building rooms where you can hear yourself think. Learning the difference between attention and care, and choosing care even when no one's applauding. On a Sunday afternoon that smelled like chimney smoke and apples, I took a photo from the edge of the dock. The house reflected clean in the water, the maple to the right just starting to light its corners red, and wrote a caption I never would have written a year ago. Worth doesn't require witnesses, but community is sweet. Thanks for being here. The comments were small and kind, friends making plans, a neighbor saying, "We have too many apples. Do you bake?" Someone asked if the wind chime ever got annoying. I wrote back, "Only when I forget what it's for." Later that week, I walked into my apartment and found a package on my mat with no return address. Inside was a slim notebook hand-stitched with a cover embossed with a single word, record. No note, but I knew my mother's taste when I felt it. First page blank except for a date. I carried it to the table, opened to the first line and wrote, "Today the wind came from the west and the chime said carry on." Then I put the notebook on the shelf by the door next to the key ring in the shape of the lake, and the small bowl where I keep screws that don't belong to anything yet but will. A week later, the notebook waited by the door like a polite suggestion. I started dropping small moments into it the way you save spare change. Sun hitting the stovetop like a coin, a neighbor kid waving from a bike, a headline that didn't wreck my blood pressure. It felt less like journaling and more like keeping proof that the days were adding up to something intentional. Kyle texted on a Wednesday night, "Mom found your post about the wind chime and cried. Dad sent me a frost depth chart like it was a love letter. Would you consider a visit, both of them, if we keep it short and on your terms?" I stared at the message, felt my chest tighten, and then loosened it with a breath. I wrote back, 3 hours. Saturday. Bring nothing but yourselves and the ability to listen. If anyone raises their voice, it's over. He replied with a thumbs up and 10 seconds later, "Thank you." They arrived in separate cars, which felt symbolic even if it wasn't. My mother stepped onto the porch holding nothing as requested, her face careful. My father carried a small toolbox anyway because he doesn't know how to show up empty-handed. I let the toolbox slide. Some offerings don't fit inside rules. We didn't hug. We did the graceful, stiff choreography of people who don't yet know if the future is a doorway or a mirror. Inside, I poured water, not wine. We sat at the table I'd chosen for its uncomplicated wood, and I started. "Ground rules," I said. "I'm not here to litigate old birthdays. I already did that. Today is about how we behave next. If you need to justify something, try instead to understand it. If you need to fix it, ask whether it's yours to fix." They both nodded like students on the first day of class. My mother reached into her tote and paused when she saw my eyebrow rise. "It's not a gift," she said quickly. "It's paper. And a pen." She set them on the table. "In case we want to write anything down. So we don't promise and forget." I recognized the attempt and let it stand. My father glanced at the back door and said, "Too casual, the latch sticks." He stood, set the toolbox down with reverence, and replaced 2 screws with the efficient movements of a man whose hands have solved things other than arguments. I watched the bowl by the door suddenly make sense. Those screws finally belonged to something. We walked the perimeter of the house like it was a site visit. My mother asked questions about paint colors and why the chairs were the exact shade they were. I told her I wanted a room that felt like exhale. "This whole place feels like exhale," she said, surprising both of us. On the deck, the wind chimes spoke and we fell quiet. "What does that one mean?" my mother asked, like the tones were a language I'd learned and she hadn't. "That one means keep the door open," I said. My father chuckled, the sound small and dusty from disuse. "Not a legal doctrine then." "Not everything needs a statute," I replied, and for once the exchange didn't become a contest. We ate lunch I'd prepped the night before. Good bread, tomatoes that knew their own names, chicken with lemon that required no ceremony. My mother insisted on washing the dishes and I let her. My father found the fuse box unprompted and labeled the few circuits I hadn't gotten to. It wasn't love, but it was a language adjacent to it. Before they left, my mother asked if we could take a photo. No special lighting, no poses, just the 3 of us on the porch. "Only if you don't put it on Facebook with a caption about blessings," I said, and she actually laughed. We stood shoulder to shoulder level. When we looked at the result, none of us was in the corner. "Send it to me," she said. "I want to put it on the fridge." The fridge. The promotion wall of my childhood home. New editorial guidelines, maybe. They drove away without promises they couldn't keep. I stood on the steps after the door shut and noticed I felt unpunished. Not triumphant. Not healed. Just not carrying the weight for all of us anymore. Work kept moving. The adjacency campaign hit its first cut of edits without drawing blood. The client greenlit the riskier headline. We built the production schedule in blocks and tried not to apologize for ambition. When the emerging leaders reception came around, I wore a dress I liked because it let me breathe in shoes that knew their job. Teresa squeezed my shoulder while the MC mispronounced half the names and said, "You belong in every room you want." After, I walked home along streets that glittered with other people's plans and called the lake to tell it the news in the only way you can, by imagining what the wind would say back. On a Friday that smelled like the second half of October, I arrived at the house late and found a small package on the stoop. No return address, my name and my father's tidy print. Inside, a heavy-duty flashlight and a note that read, "For storms that don't announce themselves." I put it in the drawer by the door with the notebook and felt a tug I didn't fight. The storms did come, one in the sky and one in our family chat. Overnight wind rattled the eaves. In the morning, a branch took the power line down the road. I made coffee on the camp stove, wrapped myself in a blanket and wrote in the notebook by hand. At lunch, Kyle texted the family thread that their firm had lost a major case after months of confidence. My mother responded with hearts and exclamation points like confetti. My father sent strategy in bullet points. I typed, "You did everything you could. Let it hurt and then take a walk." He replied privately, "Thanks. Proud of you, by the way. Not for the list. For the house." The way he separated those sentences mattered. When power came back, I invited Kyle up for the weekend again. We spent an entire Saturday doing nothing urgent. Rearranged the living room art so the frames formed a quiet conversation, taught him the trick for the door latch now that it worked properly, showed him the best place on the dock to sit if you want the wind to braid your hair without asking. He left with leftovers and a look on his face like he'd finally visited the country where I live. In November, my mother sent a calendar invitation for a dinner. My birthday months away. The subject line said, "Sydney's Day." The description said, "We're booking. You choose the place. We'll handle the cake." I didn't cry. I did sit down on the kitchen rug because my knees decided we were closer to the floor than the chair. I picked a restaurant I genuinely loved, not one that would photograph well. I added a guest, Jordan. In the comments I wrote, "We are not rescheduling if Kyle has a gala." Thanksgiving arrived like it always does. Too much food, too many opinions, not enough chairs. I split the days. One in the city with friends who brought pies like apologies for the year. One at my parents' house where the turkey was dry and the intention wasn't. At their table, my mother asked me about the campaign with a specificity that told me she had done homework. My father asked how I was budgeting for winter maintenance like the question was respect, not surveillance. Kyle and I washed dishes, backs touching in the narrow kitchen doorway, and he said, "You know we're different now, right?" "We're learning," I said. "That counts." Snow found the lake and gave it a new vocabulary. I learned how the dock sounds when ice takes it seriously and how the wind chime softens when it's wearing frost. I shoveled paths and salted steps and felt competent in a way that wasn't performative. The neighbors taught me the winter wave you give from inside a hat and a hood. James showed up one Saturday with a sled like a punchline, and we took turns acting like children who had been given permission. In the first week of January, I got an email from a local community center near the lake asking if I'd speak on a panel about self-defined milestones. The phrase made me smile. I agreed with conditions. No last names, no questions about holidays. The night of the event, I told the room exactly what I wish someone had said to me at 21. If they won't clap, clap for yourself and start building a room where your applause isn't rented. Afterward, a woman my mother's age hugged me in the careful way strangers do and whispered, "I forgot my daughter's birthday last year. I won't again." I drove home in the dark and didn't check my phone until morning. When I did, there was a text from my mother. "I bought a calendar with reminders I cannot turn off." Spring loosened the lake's grip. Ducks returned like a chorus. I planted herbs that had opinions. On a Sunday, I hosted neighbors and friends for what Margaret insisted on calling a porch warming, even though we'd been warm all year. Kyle came with a store-bought pie and a story about telling his firm no for the first time. My parents didn't attend, but they sent flowers that looked like sunrise and a card with no platitudes. "Your place is beautiful," my mother wrote. "So are your boundaries." By the time my birthday approached, the plan felt like a shared promise rather than a test. We met at the restaurant, sat at a round table so nobody could play geometry with affection, and my mother handed me a small box. Inside, a silver charm shaped like a tiny house, nothing like the gaudy things she used to choose. "You don't have to wear it," she said quickly. "It's just something to mark the day." My father slid an envelope across the table that contained a certificate for chimney service and a note. "Practical magic." Kyle toasted me with a short speech that did not center himself and ended with, "Here's to the year you didn't wait to be celebrated." The cake arrived with my name spelled correctly. We ate it. The moment didn't require a post. Later that night, back at my apartment, I pulled the notebook from the shelf and added a line under the day's entry. "I didn't ask for permission today. No one asked me to be smaller." Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote the thing I'd been circling for months. "Worth isn't a debate. It's the way you set your table." If you've listened this far, you probably know why I told you all this. It's not a guide to buying a house or a script for confronting your family. It's proof that you can write a different ending without burning every chapter that came before. If you've ever had to throw your own party because no one remembered to, hit like so this story finds someone who needs it tonight. Subscribe if you want more of the unglamorous parts. The emails you send yourself as receipts of growth. The boundaries that hold in bad weather, the quiet victories that don't trend. And in the comments, tell me one moment you stopped waiting for permission and did the thing anyway. Sentence will do. No names. Someone scrolling at 2 a.m. might need your line to sleep. Back at the lake, evening settles like a promise. The wind chimes sings a little, and the water repeats itself in an accent I'm starting to understand. I set 2 chairs on the dock, not for symbolism but for options. Some nights I sit in both, one after the other, to remember I can choose where I see from. The flashlight waits in the drawer for storms that don't announce themselves. The screws are where they belong. And on the fridge at my parents' house there's a photo with no one pushed to the edge. That's not everything, not a cure, not time travel. But it's a start. And sometimes a start is the best kind of ending.